American Politics is C-SPAN's weekly look at the people and events which shape American politics. Just ahead, Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura. This past Monday, he spoke at a fundraiser for New Jersey State Senator Bill Schluter, an independent candidate for governor in the state.
Thank you very much, but we're here to really get it from an individual who has shown us how to do it in Minnesota. An individual who has led, who has built coalitions, who has governed in a way that has earned him higher and higher and higher approval rankings. I am most honored to introduce our friend, Governor Jesse Ventura of Minnesota. Governor.
Thank you. Being that this is a campaign, I'm going to go back to the old way. If I can take you, most of you are from New Jersey or New York or the surrounding area, so you aren't sure how Jesse Ventura campaigned. Well, no notes, none at all, no offense, Bill. And never a prepared speech. I'll take you back to 1998. It was, many people don't realize that I actually was a mayor prior to becoming governor. In 1990, I ran for mayor of Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, which was the 6th largest city, against a 25-year incumbent and a city council. Now, why, you might ask, would I run for mayor? Well, we were in a battle in our neighborhood for a small wetland, a legitimate wetland. We were an old established neighborhood. And as I listened to Bill Schluter talk, it brings back memories to me because the city council and the mayor were in the pocket of a developer. The developer wanted curb, gutter, and storm sewer because it would up the value of these couple of lots that were left. But in order for him to get it, we all had to get it. We didn't need it. We were an old established neighborhood. We had ditches the old-fashioned way. The water went into the ditches and went back the normal old way, right next to the Mississippi River. So what happened? 450 of us signed a petition. We took it to City Hall and submitted it to the mayor and the council. And we were subsequently voted down 7-0. Now, I might not have run for mayor had it been 4-3 or 5-2, but a slam dunk, 7-0. We couldn't convince one of these people up there that this was a bad idea, that 450 of the direct neighbors of this wetland, we didn't want it. And of course, I'm pretty good at times at playing dumb. So I asked the mayor and the council, well, the Mississippi River's right there, why don't we just pump the water into there? The answer was, we can't. The law won't allow us to. So in other words, this was going to pollute the Mississippi River, but it wouldn't harm this wetland. So I kept getting more involved. I had no intention into getting in politics. My father hated politicians. My father's greatest quote to his son way back when was, do you know how you know? And here's another tie-in for you to campaign finance. My father said to me years ago when I was a teenager, do you know how you know all politicians are crooks? And that was his method of talking. I said, no, Dad, how do you know that? He said, because they pay $1 million for a job that pays $100 grand a year. Never would see that in the private sector, would you? Someone investing $1 million to get 1/10 of it in a return. So I kept getting more involved in local city politics, and one day they got me angry enough to where I stood at a podium. I looked at the 25-year incumbent mayor, and I said, you're going to make me run against you, aren't you? And his friend on the council laughed and said, you can't win. 65% to 35%. I won all 21 precincts, including the mayor's own precinct that he lived in. That's got to tell you something. So I served my 4 years, and when I was done with 4 years, I went back to the private sector with no intention of getting back into politics again. A few years went by, and lo and behold, the state of Minnesota had a surplus. We've had those. I don't know about Jersey, but we've had them in Minnesota. And what did they do? They spent it. The legislature and the government looked at a surplus and thought, like kids in a candy store, my goodness, what a gift this is. We can buy anything we want now. I disagreed with that. I was doing talk radio at the time. And I said, this is outrageous. That money should go back to the citizens. They have a budget. They pass a biannual budget every 2 years. They should live within that budget. If they need more money, then do it the next budget. So I kind of backed myself in a corner one day on talk radio because I uttered the words, maybe I ought to run. And lo and behold, all my listeners started prodding me, run, Jesse, run. And I was fortunate to have a party in Minnesota that I had voted for, which was called the Independence Party, later to become the Reform Party, and later still to go back to being the Independence Party due to national problems. I won't get into that. We all know the story. So I kind of backed myself in a corner to run for governor. And I'll never forget, it was a cold January. I stood on the steps of the Minnesota Capitol and the media was there, and I announced my candidacy to be governor of the great state of Minnesota. Now, of course, the media immediately thought it was a prank, a publicity stunt, whatever. And imagine what I went through for the entire campaign from January to November. Not once did they refer to me as former mayor. Not once. Now, this is the political arena. Never was I referred to as former mayor. It was always former pro wrestler. I was going against a mayor, and I was going against the attorney general, but I was always the former pro wrestler. But it had its advantages too, didn't it? They don't know how many wrestling fans are out there. So we went against huge odds. All the pundits said he can never win. This third-party candidate could never win in Minnesota after all. Look who I was going against. Hubert H. Skip Humphrey III, the son of the legend of Minnesota, Hubert Humphrey. Walk around Minnesota and see his name on how many buildings? And you know, they made me leave my radio job because they said it was unfair publicity. And yet his name's on all these buildings. How come his name didn't have to come down from all these buildings for unfair publicity? And also I went against the St. Paul mayor, Norm Coleman, the Republican. And my biggest beef against Norm was the fact that less than a year earlier, he ran for re-election as mayor. And now in less than a year, he now wants to be governor. Why did he run for mayor if he wanted to be governor? Fall back in case you lose? Maybe. Who knows why? But we had odds against us that they thought we could never win. And lo and behold, one of our major issues also was campaign finance reform. I'm happy to say that I accepted no special interest money from anyone. All my contributions were from private citizens. And that, and to show you how tough the odds can be, in fact, it was 2 years ago, right? 2, 3, what was it, Doug? How many years ago? And I've lost track. I've had so much fun. Anyway, it was at this time of the year in 1998, 3 years ago, I guess, that we were at the Minnesota State Fair. And we had a grand total of $10,000. That's all we had. And we were polling 10%. So again, he can't win. Well, we showed that in a mere 6 to 7 weeks, we went from raising $10,000 to raising $300,000, which really is a drop in the bucket. When you looked at what the Democrats, the Republicans, and the two campaigns spent, we got reports anywhere as high as 8 to 12 million against 300,000. And we went from 10% to 37%, and on November 3rd, 1998, I became the governor of the state of Minnesota. So my message to you is don't give up. Never give up. I was just a week ago at my Navy SEAL Frogman reunion in Coronado, California. And I saw the greatest t-shirt. I bought it for my daughter. And it's a t-shirt with this big, like crane-like bird standing there, and in his mouth is a frog. You know, catch the tie-in to a frogman? But the problem was, and then the title at the bottom of this shirt said, "Never give up." Because the frog was going down the throat of the bird, but his hand was out grabbing the bird by the throat. So in other words, the bird's not going to be able to swallow him. Don't give up. And that's the message. Because believe it or not, win, lose, or draw, Bill will be a candidate that will bring the big issues to the table. The third party always does that. The two major parties don't like to talk about the issues certain issues they don't want to talk about. That's where the third party comes into play. That's where we win, even if we may not win. We will end up winning. Because we'll bring to the table campaign finance reform. And let's talk about that a moment, if we may. This carotid artery to the Democrats and the Republicans. Oh yeah, they're going to talk about doing it. They're going to do incidental little changes, but rest assured they will leave big loopholes. They have to, because it is their lifeblood. They cannot win without it. They are bought and sold. How many people here have ever looked up the definition of bribery in the dictionary? Well, if you look it up in the dictionary, what you'll see is this. Bribery is defined as giving something of value to someone in power in hopes of influencing their decision. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like the system we have in America today, a system based upon bribery? In the private sector, you get arrested. In the public sector, it's the norm. That's got to change. And why does it have to change? Let me give you an example. The highest voter turnout in the United States of America in the last two elections and in many before that is the state of Minnesota. Yeah. We have the biggest voter turnout. Who is second? Maine. Now, what's ironic about that is Maine and Minnesota are the only two states that have independent governors who are not part of the Republican and Democratic parties. Now, what do we learn from that? We learn that states that elect independent governors have more citizen involvement. There's not the cynicism. There's not the feeling of my vote doesn't count. And believe me, I heard it all during the election. I heard because I'm fiscally conservative and I'm socially liberal. I heard I was going to elect the Democrat Hubert Humphrey because I was going to siphon off the votes from Republican Norm Coleman. But what was the reality? That was totally wrong. Mr. Coleman, when he got the Republican nomination, was polling 32%. He stayed within that margin of error through the entire election and finished with 34% within the margin of error. Yet I was going to take his votes. Mr. Humphrey at that time was polling 46 to 48%, while I was polling 10. In the end, I got 37, the Republican 34, the Democrat 28. So don't buy into what the media tells you about your siphoning off votes from one or another. A vote is nothing, a vote is earned. You earn the right to that vote. It is not given to somebody because you're a Republican or given to somebody because you're a Democrat. It is earned. And people say if you vote third party, you're wasting your vote. I don't believe that for 1 minute. If you don't vote your heart and your conscience, then you've wasted your vote. Clearly. An election is not a horse race. You're not out there to vote for who you think is going to win. You're out there to vote for whom you think has the best ideals closest to yourself. That's who you vote for. The last presidential election, I voted for John Hagelin. Why did I vote for him? I voted for John for One major reason. We held a debate in Minnesota. We invited all the candidates to come and participate, all the third-party candidates, as well as the two major party candidates. Well, naturally, the Democrat and Republican didn't show up, but neither did Ralph Nader or Pat Buchanan. And here they were crying out, we can't get publicity. They won't pay attention to us. That debate was broadcast live on C-SPAN. Why wouldn't they want to get their message across to the entire country? So I sat down that night, and the 4 or 5 candidates that did show up, I said, one of these candidates will get my vote tonight. And John Hagelin, to me, was the candidate who best deserved my vote, and therefore I voted for him. Now, did he win? Absolutely not. But I can look myself in the mirror every night and say I voted for the candidate that best represented Jesse Ventura. I didn't go along because I knew John Hagelin wasn't going to win. Let's be real. I knew that. He didn't have the money. We weren't going to be allowed in the debates, which is another thing that should outrage you as the public. These debates. It takes 5% to get major party status, yet did you notice the last presidential election? They set the bar at 15 in a poll. If you didn't have 15% in a poll, you weren't going to be allowed to debate. Well, isn't it pretty nice when it's the people from the two parties they put together on a commission? One of them, I think, headed one of the parties at one point in time, and they determine who gets to debate. I think the American people should be outraged over that. And I think that we as American people should be outraged over the fact that we're getting a pathetic amount, like 50% turning out to vote. And I hear here in New Jersey, it's even worse than that. I hear it's less than 50. Now, is that a system of government where the greatest thing you have is your right to vote? And when people sit back and say how important, you know, you hear the thing, well, my vote doesn't really count, I'm just one vote. Tell that to Al Gore. Tell Al Gore that that one vote doesn't count, right? Everyone was all concerned about Florida, right, in this last election. Well, the count of the vote, the miscount, and all the shenanigans that might have gone on. To me, that didn't make the difference in that election, that presidential election. It really didn't. You know what to me was the difference? The fact that Vice President Gore couldn't win his home state. Had he won Tennessee, Florida wouldn't have mattered. He was what, 2 electoral votes away? Had he won Tennessee, his home state, or Arkansas, the state of President Clinton, had he won either of those 2 states, Florida would have been irrelevant. It wouldn't have mattered. So don't buy into the fact that your vote does not count. Your vote does count, and it is your civic duty to go out and vote. Many veterans have given their lives for this country, for the simple fact of being able to vote and how important that is. That's why I'm asking all of you, I'm challenging you, the state of New Jersey, try to be what Minnesota is. Because I guarantee you, you walk around this country, not only this country, but the world, everybody knows who the governor of Minnesota is. And everybody would not know that if I were a Democrat or Republican. They know it because I upset the apple cart. I turn things over. We change things. We got a new look in Minnesota now. My approval ratings have been as high as 73%. Now in a 3-person race, that's pretty solid. Now granted, I did the Playboy interview and it fell to 57. But then again, it rebounded back up to 71 or 72, so you get forgiven. Because I think people will judge you, as I always tell them, don't judge me by what I say, judge me by what I do. Talk is cheap, a friend of mine used to tell me, an old power lifter I used to lift with. Talk is cheap. Everybody will tell you how much weight they're going to lift. But the point is, they got to walk in there and lift it up. And that's how cheap the talk is. So, for me, I love the third party movement. I love it because Why today is America, the United States, the greatest country in the world, given only two choices? If we were to turn the clock back 150 years ago, there was another candidate at that time for president who was a third-party candidate. That candidate's name was Abraham Lincoln. At that time, the Republican Party was the new party on the block. They were the third-party movement, although I was told this morning there were actually four parties back then. That even makes my case more. How much has our population grown since 150 years ago to what it is today? And yet 150 years ago we had four choices. Today we have two. Something's wrong with that picture, ladies and gentlemen. It is time for more choices and more ideas out there. And I'm so proud of Bill for stepping forward. It takes guts to quit a party. Or maybe it takes guts to have the party quit you. I'm not sure how that works. But it takes courage to do that and to step forward and put your name on that dotted line against insurmountable odds and money. But Bill has done that. And I'll absolutely. He's taken that chance because he knows the system can be better. And he also knows this is the greatest country in the world. And to him, without a doubt, New Jersey is the greatest state in the United States. He's taken that chance. So win, lose, or draw, he must be respected for what he is doing. That's why I came out here in support of Bill. That's why I took time out, and I'll tell you, this is my first trip outside the state of Minnesota in support of a candidate. And certainly, he can't do it without you. He can't do it without you, and unfortunately, yes, it takes money. And it's a very difficult when you've got the money. When Bill was up here talking, I was appalled over the things he was talking about. It's, to me, that's unbelievable, unconscionable that that's going on. The dirty money, the money that flows into these two parties, that come into the system, the soft money, the money that doesn't even have to be accountable for. And worse than all of it, money from foreign countries. Foreign countries are now buying and selling our political system today. Both parties accept it, and they accept it until they get caught. And then when they get caught, they might give it back. But you have to catch them first. Well, win, lose, or draw, I know that I can always look in the mirror and know what I stood for. And I know that if I run again in Minnesota, I've already told people we raised $300,000 last time. I've already said the next time I will raise less. Because my next challenge, nothing will equal what happened in '98. Doug Friedline will tell you that. Nothing will equal it in Minnesota. It was really an almost out-of-body experience, if you can talk about it, when all of a sudden at 5%, I took the lead and never relinquished it, and ended up with 60% of the vote counted. That check mark went on the board. And I'll tell you a great story. Many of you probably know, or if you don't, I've done a few films with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold's married to Maria Shriver. Early in that fateful November election, Maria called me and said, "Jesse, can I have an interview with you tonight?" I said, "Absolutely, Maria. I mean, she's been a friend of mine for years. Of course I'm going to give her an interview from NBC." Maria went back to her bosses and said, "I've got Jesse Ventura." NBC turned to Maria and said, "We don't care. We're only interviewing winners tonight." Well, lo and behold, when I was declared the winner, all of a sudden, they're panicked at NBC. They go charging to Maria Shriver, but you know what they wanted to do? They wanted Brokaw to have it. He's the big gun. Well, I'm loyal to my friends. I said, I won't interview with Brokaw. I agreed to interview with Maria Shriver. That's who I will interview with. Well, one of the great things you learn is that compromises have to be made. So we finally settled that Maria would start the interview, and halfway through it, she would then throw to Brokaw. I said, that's fine, just as long as Maria starts the interview. So it kind of set the table for me of how to deal with these Republicans and Democrats. And when they tell you that an independent governor can't succeed, don't believe it for 1 minute. We've accomplished more in Minnesota in my 2.5 years than many, many governors, fine governors before me, couldn't get done. We got legitimate reform to property taxes this year. Governor Arnie Carlson couldn't do it. Governor Rudy Perpich before me couldn't do it. And they even had parties there. I have one person, and that's a defector from the Democrats, joined our party. We have 201 legislators in Minnesota. I have one. So I battle against 200 of them. And even Bob Lassard, sometimes I battle him too, and he's in my party. But that's okay, because in our party, you only have to agree on 70% of the platform to be part of our party, and that's what I like about it. We can have differences, and yet in the end, we can stick together. So, in finishing up, and then what I'll do, I'll open for question and answer, because that sometimes works the best, because I'm not sure what you want to talk about, especially when I go without notes. Who knows where you end up? We could end up talking about the XFL. But just to show you, I guess, the turmoil I've caused in Minnesota is that, you know, I take extra jobs. And I have to, because the legislature this year gave raises to every executive in the executive branch except the governor. Imagine that. How do they justify that? Lieutenant governor got a raise, attorney general got a raise, state auditor got a raise, right down the line except the governor. But you know what? I wasn't mad. You know why? That gives me a great excuse to still work in the private sector. Because I'll say, you didn't give me a raise. I got to support my family. So, but yet they had, imagine this. Here's what you deal with today. This year's legislative session, we had to have a special session which came within 3 hours of a government shutdown. A government shutdown. I pulled the leadership in with 8 days before the end of the session. They had to end on May the 21st. And I said, where you at? What's, you know, where are we at here? They were 0.7% apart. 0.7% on the budget. They couldn't resolve it. Session ended. I had to call them back in a special session. They fought for 3 more weeks, and with 3 hours to go, the bills finally came to my desk. They risk a government shutdown over their piddly fighting between the Democrats and Republicans. And that's what it's all about in there. Why? Because what you have with these two parties is not doing what's right for the public or the people. It's a power game. Who controls and who has the power? That's what they're looking for. Case in point, I reduced our license tabs on cars and made them a flat rate across the board. Because to me, it shouldn't matter the price. What we had was a 10-year sales tax on every car you bought. You buy the car new, for 2 years you pay this huge amount, then it drops a little, every 2 years it drops a little. Well, that's ridiculous. If you buy a Harley Davidson for $25,000, or if you buy a Honda 50, it's the same. I don't get it. You're buying a license to drive on the roads. It shouldn't matter what the price of the car is. What response do I get from the Republicans on that? They say behind closed doors, Governor, we think it's a great idea, but we'll never support it because you'll get the credit. They'll never support it because I'll get the credit. That's what you're dealing with these two parties. And I will continue always to be a third-party person. I will continue always to support people like Bill, who have the courage to step out there. And I'll finish by saying to you, by challenging the state of New Jersey, oh yeah, your Giants beat the Vikings last year. Yeah, you did. But do you have the courage to elect a third-party governor? Do you have that courage? Because believe me, that is one thing you can do that will last a lot longer than that NFC title game last year, because by now everybody's forgotten about it because it's a whole new season. What happened yesterday in pro sports is meaningless. It's what happens this year now. So I challenge you, and it's got to come from you. Have the courage. Send that shockwave across America like Minnesota did in 1998. Send that shockwave to the Democrats and Republicans and make them do the right thing. Believe me, they can do it if they're pushed to do it. But it's going to take the third-party movement to do that. Thank you very, very much.